Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for October 4th, 2022. Well, there's some extremely interesting developments over the last couple of days in the form of a backlash against the fake narratives that are being presented around the Ukraine war and the NATO policy. And by fake narratives, I mean lies. We've gone maybe one lie too far with the story coming out around the explosion of the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines. But when fake narratives become too ludicrous to believe, the governments and official institutions pushing them not only lose credibility, but it creates the basis for a change in policy. And we've seen this over and over. The 9/11 story on the terrorist attack on the United States, that it was organized out of bat caves in Afghanistan, the weapons of mass destruction story about Iraq, which is totally made up and complete lies. No consequences for that yet, but everyone knows that it was a lie. The story of the Maidan Democratic Revolution. The fact that the cover-up of the Nazi involvement, the cover-up of the $5 billion spent by the U.S. to organize it. These stories cause a loss of credibility for the people who push them. The Russian electoral interference against Donald Trump, completely discredited, but still reported by certain individuals who were unwilling to acknowledge that they were caught lying. The Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant shelling, the argument that Russia is shelling against its own troops inside the plant. Again, a blatant lie, but you still hear it reported in the mainstream media. Now, the tide is turning against this, especially with this latest story that Russia blew up its own pipeline. Now, NATO's immediate reaction was to put out a statement describing this as the result of, quote, deliberate, reckless, and irresponsible act of sabotage. Any deliberate attack against allies' critical infrastructure would be met with a united and determined response, unquote. That from NATO. Well, the finger is pointing at NATO. The Russians clearly would not do it. There's a call for an investigation, but this statement from NATO was put out before any real investigation had been undertaken. There's a lot of circumstantial evidence pointing to NATO, and some people are saying the United States because of Biden's February statement about no Nord Stream pipelines, Victoria Nuland's attack on it, and so on. But there's reason to believe that it may not have been the U.S. and might have been NATO working in conjunction with British intelligence. But that's still, the jury's still out on that. The fact is, Russia should be involved in the investigation because it was a Russian pipeline that was blown up. Now, meanwhile, other parts of the circumstantial evidence, the opening the same day of the explosions of the new pipeline to Poland, the Blinken-Joly press conference, Joly being the Canadian foreign minister, where they announced increases in Canadian and U.S. liquid natural gas to Europe. And in general, what's very interesting is the silence from the German government. There's a history of German-Russian ties, economic ties. These go back to Gottfried Leibniz and his relationship with Peter the Great in establishing the academy at St. Petersburg. There's long historic ties. The Rapallo Treaty is another example from 1922. And historically, who's been most upset about German-Russian ties? It's the British. This is embedded in British history in the form of the Mackinder Doctrine, against a Eurasian alliance that incorporates countries in Central and Western Europe into the alliance. So there's been no discussion of that. But that, in fact, is a reality. The fear that a German-Russian alliance would break apart the commitment of the NATO countries to destroy Russia should be at the forefront of things investigated when you look at who had the motive and intention and capability to destroy the pipeline. Now, it's also the case that there are rumors of back-channel negotiations between Russia and Germany that were going on before the explosion. Now, interestingly, a former speechwriter for Donald Trump named Darren Beatty, who's the editor of Revolver News, was quoted in the Gateway Pundit on some comments that he made. He said, quote, "The Europeans all quietly understand that this is likely at the hands of the NATO allies itself. That's why they're being good little vassal states and not making a lot of noise about it," unquote. Well, it's clear that there's an intention to break the German-Russian relationship. And this also, by the way, would break the US-German relationship. Now, Beatty went on to describe the establishment in the US as obsessed with destroying Russia and maintaining complete hegemony over Europe, unquote. Now, several Germans that we speak with privately have made the same point, although they're afraid to speak out publicly. Now, Beatty concluded by saying that European leaders know this, but they, quote, "prefer to serve the interest of others. This is no longer servility, but direct betrayal of their own people," unquote. Now, other headlines on this. Elon Musk spoke out calling for diplomacy to end the war. He said, "If you wish to prevent the deaths of millions, you must negotiate." He said, "Ukraine can't win." Quote, "If you care about the people of Ukraine, seek peace," unquote. This is a comment that I made, which was attacked by the Ukrainian Committee to Combat Disinformation as a Russian talking point. That is, if you want peace and if you care about the people of Ukraine, seek peace. That makes you a Russian agent. That's what we're dealing with here. Now, other examples of this, Colonel Douglas Macgregor made the point that if NATO continues to push for an all-out war with Russia, quote, "it will fragment and dissolve," unquote. Berlusconi, who is part of the coalition that's coming in as the new government in Italy, has insisted that there must be mediations, and he recommended Angela Merkel, the former chancellor of Germany, as one of the people who could be involved in the negotiations. The Vatican, Pope Francis has called for negotiation. Keep in mind, the Vatican played a leading role as a back channel between John Kennedy and Nikita Khrushchev 60 years ago in resolving the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I know many of you are suspicious about Pope Francis. There are reasons to be suspicious, but on this, he's speaking for the millions of Catholics in the world who would prefer to see a peace agreement to a nuclear war. And he called on Putin to make a proposal for negotiation and for Zelensky to accept it. Good luck for Zelensky. Erdogan, the Turkish president, reiterated that Turkey will not accept Sweden and Finland as members in NATO unless they meet his conditions. That's another example of a brake being put on the NATO alliance. 66 nations at the United Nations refused to join the anti-Russian sanctions, led by many nations from the so-called Global South. In Germany, demonstrations are growing, reaching the thousands in Eastern Germany over the weekend. Now keep in mind that it was in 1989 that there was a nonlinear growth of the numbers who came out to the Monday demonstrations, which brought down the communist dictatorship. We're seeing a similar pattern starting now, before the weather gets cold and before the lack of energy and electricity in Germany starts freezing people to death. So this will probably, it will definitely continue to build. And Bulgaria, the fanatic pro-NATO government, was defeated in elections on Sunday. And the new government that's coming in will probably be less pro-NATO and less anti-Russian. So another government in the European Union has rejected the policy of NATO of all-out war against Russia. And one final note, and this is a delightful example of someone being forced to eat crow. The Liz Truss government of the United Kingdom made a major U-turn on the tax cut question. This is based on the neoliberal fanaticism of Truss and her Chancellor of the Exchequer, who were going to give a massive tax cut to the wealthiest people in the United Kingdom. Why did they reverse this? Well, they're desperate to stop the collapse of the pound and the collapse of support for Truss and her government. So it appears as though the government of the UK may be one of the next to fall. Now, we have to build on these developments. None of this is definitive because the war continues, the narratives continue, the lies continue, the arm flows into Ukraine continue, the sanctions continue to kill people around the world. So we have to build on these developments. And there are a couple of things I want to call to your attention. On this Thursday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, the Schiller Institute will sponsor a press availability, which will include a number of people who are on the Ukrainian Committee to Combat Disinformation and the Mirotvorets list, the hit list or the kill list, will be speaking under the topic, "We will not be silenced, speaking truth in times of war." There have been new names added to the list, including journalists Ava Bartlett, a courageous young woman, and Tucker Carlson, also actor Steven Seagal, and President Museveni of Uganda have been added to the list. And finally, we'll have a link to the upcoming Youth International Conference. Get active with us. We have to build on this momentum to reverse the otherwise sleepwalk that's going on into World War III. So thanks for joining me. I'll see you again tomorrow.